welcome to this Advanced Steel Skill Builders session where today we're going to be looking at hidden gems in the connection vault. I just want to check, could someone just in the questions confirm that you can see my screen okay and you can hear me okay? Lovely, thank you, Elias. Perfect. Thank you, Anas. Okay, so this is one of our skill builder sessions. So short and sharp. It's only 30 minutes, so we won't waste too much time today. We'll start with a little bit about me. I do recognize most of the names here, so I'm sure you're all sick to death of me in this slide by now. But a little bit about me for the new people. So my name is Rob Merriman. I'm one of the application engineers here at Greytech UK. I've got 12 years experience in the construction industry. It is actually the only industry I've worked in since finishing university. The first 8 years of that were spent as an architectural metalwork and structural steelwork draftsman using advanced steel. Over those 8 years, I worked in 2 subcontract drawing offices. So being a subcontractor, we worked in each company for about 10 to 15 different fabricators. So over the course of those 8 years, it's sort of 20 to 30 different fabricators, all doing things in a slightly different way and working on different types of projects. So I now work, as I said, as a structures application engineer for Greytech UK. So taking that first-hand industry experience to do demonstrations, training, technical support, customization for structural CAD packages, and we obviously do lots of these events and presentations. My main focus is advanced steel, but we do also look at AutoCAD, Revit, Navisworks, Recap, Fusion 360, anything to do with steelwork. I'll at least have an explore and have a look at. So just a tiny little bit about Greytech. So why Greytech? We believe we're one of the only resellers and partners that can work with you across all areas of your project. So we've broken down those into what we call our 4 key pillars. So they are create, simulate, fabricate, and manage. So create is using the Autodesk products and enhancing them with the Greytech Power Packs. Simulate is taking those BIM models and actually making sure that they can work in a real-world environment. So we have our own analysis package called Advanced Design to look after that. Fabricate is taking, obviously, your models through to the finished fabricated product and site delivery. So we have a couple of tools. We have Advanced Workshop to look after your workshop, and we have Armor Plus, which looks after your site delivery and things like that. And obviously for you guys, we're looking at Advanced Steel today. Advanced Steel sits in the Fabricate pillar as well. And then finally, we've got Manage. So we all produce work in progress data, BIM data, and usually on larger projects now, we have to collaborate with what we call a common data environment where you've got to upload your documents. And if you're working on 5 projects for 5 different contractors, you might have to upload your documents to 5 different common data environments, which can obviously be time consuming and frustrating at times. So we have our package called OpenTree, which will look after all of that interfacing with the common data environments for you. Okay, so what are we going to look at today? We are looking at hidden gems in the connection vault. We're going to start with the end plate macros. We'll look at how we can then create internal end plates on things like box sections. We'll look at some cranked beam to beam connections. We'll look at gable post fin plates. We'll look at some double post beam connections. We'll look at some, it's not within the connection vault, but it's a notched shop connection. I'll talk about the base plate macro. This one comes up quite a lot on our technical support. It's an end plate with bolts just to one side. And then finally, we'll look at what you guys could do with joint names and the propagate joint. So it is some hidden gems. I have only got now 25 minutes, so we can't show everything, but hopefully you guys, although you're all experienced advanced steel users, there might be a few bits and pieces that you'll pick up today. And I think this is a session that we can run again in the future, and we can look at other joints. and I will take any questions that you guys have at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get cracking and actually look at some connections. Now like I said, we've only got half an hour in here. So first thing with your connection vault, you have this little arrow here. Now, if you're not sure what a connection will do for you, this will give you a preview and a description of how that connection works. If we look at the base plate, in here, for example, these are the options within the base plate itself, and then it will tell you what selection order you need to click things in, what profiles or what sections it works on, and then a brief description of what it's going to do. So very useful if you're not sure how a joint is going to work. I'm going to start with a couple of these you might already be aware of. We're going to start with the box section, and we'll make it, let's say make it 2 meters. That will do. We'll zoom back in on that. Now, if we want a cap plate on the top of this box section, there is a macro in here called an end plate macro. Now, some people think, well, I can just quickly draw a plate by 2 points and put it on there. The things we can do within this joint, we can say, well, let's make that a 5mm end plate. Now, the shortening, I can say shorten by the plate thickness, so I can draw my sections at the correct length and put a 5mm cap, and it will shorten it automatically for me. Then we're going to set our layout to projections. If I set that to 0 projections all round, that will give me a flush end plate. I could probably set this to a 6mm fillet weld all round. Now, the benefit of using this joint over drawing it manually is if I then go and change the box section, or even if I change it completely to a square hollow section, and we change it to something like that, that joint's going to update itself automatically. Now, we might say, okay, well, fine, well, we need that to be a 10mm box section, and we actually want it brought in 3 or 4mm so we can just run a 3 or 4mm fillet weld around it. Well, that's fine. We can just say in the dimensions -3mm or -4mm. And again, that's going to save that information in there. So you might think that you can just, and there's nothing, you can obviously draw it as a plate, but putting this kind of information in will allow you to copy things around. We obviously can copy that around to different section sizes, and if something changes, then the plate will update itself automatically. Now, some people want a plate inside the box section. So let's just make this something a bit smaller, 100 by 10. Now, what we can do instead, we can use this stiffener box column joint. Now, what this is looking at creating is a stiffener inside with backing plates and things. So seems like an odd one to use, but I'll put that in there. And it does look a little bit crazy to begin with. But what we can do for our backing bar settings, I can turn those to none. And we'll keep our plate thickness at 10mm. But what I can do in here, the plate gap, I can set that to say 0.5 or 1mm. For my plate corners, I can put a straight corner on there of, say, 8mm. It's going to be 10mm. And that then, and if I want to bring that up so it's flush, I can just move this little grip point. So any joints that have this little sphere, this is where we're inserting a connection. So I can just drag that up and I can type 5mm, and that will, if we go back to a realistic view, that will give me my internal cap plate with shoulders, with chamfers, and it's welded to the box section. So if we do a clear marking and show me what's attached in here, we can see that's welded automatically. So again, we could draw it manually, but again, if we change the size of that box section, that is going to update itself automatically. Now, while we're looking at this tab, we'll very, very quickly, today's going to be a lot of me jumping about all over the place and putting some random things in. We're going to use the stiffener macro. So you choose your beam object and you choose your location point. So I'll just say it's going to be the midpoint in here. That's fine, that'll put a stiffener on for us. One thing people don't always realise with some of these joints is that we can put a pattern in. So I can say, well, I want 5 sets of stiffeners at 200, so that's giving me a pattern of 5 in the direction of the top. Obviously bottom will go the other way, or both will give me my pattern in both directions at certain centres. So we can do that within the stiffener. We'll have a look at the beam end to end. What I'm going to show you is, let's just put a couple of beams in. Now, let's say we've got a bit of cranked roof steel work. Now, we could obviously just miter these 2 beams, like so. And obviously, we need to put a butt weld in. Now, with that butt weld, it's got to be tested. It costs more to actually do the weld. You've got to test it, and we've got to fully test it. Whereas if we did it with a division plate, you can fillet weld either side of that division plate, and then you've only got to test a certain percentage of your welds. Now we could in here put a 10mm gap in there, and then set our UCS and put our plate in and then weld it. But there is actually a connection in here for our beam end to end. We've got a cranked beam to beam connection. So you choose one plate, you choose one beam, you choose the other beam, and that will put the miter on with what I call the division plate. So again, the layout is based currently on the projections, but we could change that to total from middle, total from edge, and I could say we'll project 10mm all round, and that'll give me enough room to get my fillet weld in all round. So quite a simple one. I think you'll all find that today there's nothing groundbreaking in what I'm showing you today, but hopefully it maybe just will give you food for thought on a few of these different connections, and maybe there'll be some other connections that you could look at for the future. The benefit of using these sorts of connections is if I drag this over this way, that is going to update itself automatically. Something else we're going to look at in here, and again, I haven't really used this one in the past, haven't used it much, but my mouse keeps picking the wrong point. That's better. Just going to drop a gable in here. Now on this connection in here, this could be a gable frame on our macro, and we want to connect that with a fin plate. Now, what a lot of people sometimes might forget is that with this connection vault, it's not obvious, but we can actually scroll up and down in here. And if we scroll down, we do have a couple of fin plate connections in here for a gable. So we've got gable post fin. So we choose our rafter, we choose our gable column, and that will put in our fin plate, where we can obviously set the width of the plate, change the side if we want, change the side if we want. We can enable or disable slotted holes, so you've got a little bit of sight tolerance in there. as with all the connections, we can obviously set the bolts and the distances. If you want a horizontal cut in there, we can do that within the macros as you would normally expect to. And there's one with shortening and one without shortening. So again, not something I was personally fully aware of, or something that we think is used very often. Similar types of connection if we've got a sort of mezzanine structure in here. And we'll just change the section size of this one. But what we'll do in here, we'll set both of these beams to the same height. We do have connections like this in here, where we've got a post double beam connection. So again, select your post. So again, always with these connections, look in your command line, select the first beam, and then select the second beam. And that is going to put in a single plate on the post, on the column. And then, because we need it, we've got packer plates in here. And then it's just a case of actually then working through the dialog to set the plates how we actually want it. But again, for people who do mezzanines, there's quite a lot with those. It's quite a lot of these types of connections in the mezzanine, and a lot of people just maybe forget that you can actually scroll down in this palette. Okay, so next up no, technically this isn't part of the connection vault, but I'm just gonna go and show you a couple of bits and pieces, and this will apply to connections in the connection vault. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to move this beam down this way. We'll just zoom in on here. Now, if we want to weld these two together with a notch, we would go to the Features tab on our tool palette, and we would use Parametric Notch Joint. So I choose the two inputs there, and I would go through the dialog. So if I want this like a millimeter clear all round, I want to have a straight corner finish in there of say 15 mil. What I want to do is I want to create a weld, and the one thing with this, only this one, this is sort of mini connection, is the weld location in here says site. So what we want to do, I want to change that to shop. Now, before I do anything else, my advice to you guys would be to run a clash check to make sure that we actually don't have any clashes, and we'll just do a show me what's attached in the workshop, because this is, we're sort of doing this manually. Now, if I wanted to use all those settings on every job, on every time I put this connection on to begin with, what we can do is on all these connections, you have a library. What I can do is I can say import values, and that will import the values. Now, it doesn't have a description in here. If you want your library entry to be used the first and every time, what we need to do, for the name, you want to call it default. And then your entry will be used each and every time. So if I go and start a new project, what I'm going to do, and we'll put in some different beam sizes this time. So what we'll do, we'll make them, well, let's make them a lot bigger. We obviously need to just stretch these beams a little bit. But then if I go in here although this is from the Features tab. That will now, if we look at the parameters, 111, straight cut, and the wells are set to shop, because that is called default. So that's what we can do in there. Now, just looking at this in here, let's say we're we're anchoring into a concrete wall or something like that. Although this macro on the plates of beam tab is called the base plate macro, it's basically used if you're anchoring into any concrete object. So I can still use the base plate macro for the end of my beam. And that will apply that there for me. So yes, it goes on a column, but we can also use it in here if we're anchoring into the wall, for example. Now, I'll just look at the library in here, because I think there will be a default entry on the library. And I haven't said that. Of course there isn't going to be. They're all just different sizes. If there is a default, there we go. Now, if you wanted to add your own default in there, what we would need to do, we would need to click the edit button before we brought in our values. So I'd click the edit button. I would scroll down, and what you want to do is you want to look at renaming this default to calling it something else, like default old or an actual descriptive name, and then you would go and bring in your default. You don't just want to bring your own one in and try and call that default, because there's going to be one default that already exists. So just a little bit of advice for that. As we're looking at the base plate macro, sometimes you want to put in a base plate macro, say you're connecting into the underside of a slab. Now, what you would do is you would still use the base plate macro. If I click the top of the column, let's see what it wants to do. Now it's gone to the bottom of the column. So in the base plate macro itself, you've got this little tick box in here, it says switch beam end. So I can then connect into the underside of the slab if needed. Let's actually get rid of that. Otherwise this model is going to be a big collection of random joints. We are slowly running out of time. One of the ones I definitely wanted to look at, it comes up on support every now and then. We'll put that in there. Let's say you want to connect this I-beam, but you only want bolts on one side. Maybe you've got an access issue, or maybe you just want 3 bolts. Now, what a lot of people would do is try and use the moment end plate, for example, and then, because you can't control that, delete the macro, and then look to just delete those bolts in there, which is fine. But if someone comes back and makes a change, we've got to then go and actually then move everything manually, which is obviously what we're trying to avoid. So what you can use instead, in the platform beams bolt, we have this end plate at flange reference beam. So select the passing main beam, that's this one here. Select the secondary beam that's to be attached, that's this one here. Now that will put on our end plate with a number of fixings. But what we can do is, if you have a look in here, we've got an end plate size, so you do have to work out the projections from the actual beam itself. So it does work in a slightly different way to what most people would be used to. But for the bolts, we can set the bolt diameter. And then in here, we've got these options, bolts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we can actually set some of these to 0. So it's not bolt number 1. And it's probably, so it will be bolt number 2. I can set bolt number 2 to 0. and I probably, for this example, I will set bolt number 3, and I'll probably set bolt number 4 as well to 0, so that I've just got one dialog, or one tab on the dialog, and I can say, well, offset to the web, that's 50 mil, offset to the flange, or just for today we'll say, well, 50 is too much, 30 mil, and I want 2 parallel to the web, and I want those centers at 100 or 150, and then I'm obviously going to have to play with my values. It would help if you actually knew what you were trying to do. But that is how we can have an end plate in there with just 2 bolts. It's still all welded together. It's still all a macro, a connection. So it's worth having that sort of stuff in there. Let's see what else we're going to have a look at. I think the last bit we'll look at with the connection vault is actually a few things that we can do with copying around connections and what that can actually do for our drawing. So I'm just going to open up our classic Greytec UK training shed. You probably all recognise this by now. I'll just show you a few things that could be beneficial to you with joints. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take these base plates off here. Now we've sort of shown this from time to time. We'll take these off, we'll take this off. Now this connection in here, in fact, I'll take it off, we'll start from scratch. I'm going to put a base plate on. I'm going to choose my base plate connection. I'm just going to say no on the concrete for now. Now, all these connections that we put in, these connections have a name. So these connections obviously need to be designed by a connection engineer. They'll give you a sheet of calculations, or it'll be on the main contractor's drawing. Someone will have actually designed that base plate connection, and will have called it like BP1 or base plate A. So in our name, we can call this BP1. Now, if I've got just base plates like this, a single input connection, I can select the joint box, right-click, and I can choose propagate joint. That will look for sections with exactly the same section size and the same model roll. So all these are called column, and they've all got the same section size. What propagate does is it puts the joints in a group. So if I double click on those, they're all part of the group, so I can't change anything. They're controlled by the primary connection. But if we look at the properties, they all say BP1. Now, this is beneficial if someone else in the office is checking your work, because they can see which connection is which. It's also beneficial just for you if you come back to the project 2 or 3 weeks later. Now, if you don't like using propagate, we can just use the joint, create a joint in a joint group. We'll create a joint in a joint group multiple, and that will do the same thing. So I can select our columns. And that will put that on there. And they are part of the group. So they are base plate 1. Now, for our GA view, we're going to run a style called stanchion layout all. Now, what stanchion layout all will do automatically for you, if we go to drawing processes, and we'll just run a new camera for today. Get this running. If I go and open up this drawing, that particular style will actually label the base plates automatically for you. So each base plate is called base plate 1. That one there I actually call base plate 2 anyway, so it's on there automatically. So Different styles will show that kind of thing. If we, for example, called this haunch, might have even already done this. If I go into the haunch, and this is the last thing I'll show you, because my time is already up. If I go call that C1, again, I'll just go and run this drawing. Or maybe what we'll do, yeah, we'll run that drawing just for now. Camera selected A1. Now it might not automatically show, well, I know in this one it won't show automatically, and this is a blow up anyway. But if we had a whole plan or a whole elevation, you could actually select the plates and label it. And on that one, we do actually have joint name in here. So again, that will say C1. So on an overall plan, it can be very, very easy to name your joints if you put that kind of information in the joints. And that is all we've got time for today, I'm afraid. Like I said, there's 230 odd joints in the connection vault. So I'm sure we'll be running these skill builders again in the future. So it's always something we can come back and look at again. We're always learning new bits and pieces. If anyone does have any questions, obviously please type them in now in the questions dialogue. And if not, thank you very much for watching. The session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our content portal within the next couple of weeks. And if you have missed any of the previous webinars, previous skill builders, they're all uploaded to our content portal. And I can't see anything coming through, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you on future webinars and future sessions. If you do have any questions or anything that you can't think of right now, you've got my contact information, so just reach out to us that way. And once again, thanks for attending this morning's session.